Welcome to Monday Night Live. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this episode, we're going to be speaking to Bob McCoskrie. Before I introduce Bob, though, let me just say a huge thank you to all of our supporters at patreon.com/leftfootmedia. Thanks to you guys, this episode was made possible. Now, if you're not already a member of our Patreon community, you can join us right now for as little as $1 a month or as much as you'd like to contribute at patreon.com/leftfootmedia. Not only will you be helping to ensure that more of this great content keeps getting made, but if you support us with $5 or more per month, you will get exclusive access to an extra 4 to 5 exclusive patron-only episodes of our audio podcast, The Dispatches, every single month. So there you go, a great return on your investment in this humble but growing independent media venture. Right, back to our guest. Bob is the married father of 3 children who hails from South Auckland in New Zealand. He has a Masters of Commerce with honours from Auckland University and a Diploma of Teaching from the Auckland College of Education. In 1994, he set up the Papatoe Adolescent Christian Trust, working with at-risk youth and their families in schools in the South Auckland community. In 1996, he was appointed a Justice of the Peace, and Bob is now the National Director of Family First New Zealand, which he established in 2006. Family First has quickly become a well-known and strongly supported voice for family issues at a public, media and political level, with one mainstream media journalist recently going so far as to describe him as New Zealand's most formidable Conservative campaigner. So without any further ado, let's have this important conversation with Bob McCoskrie about conversion therapy, free speech and other controversial bills that are currently before the New Zealand Parliament. Bob, thanks so much for being back again on Monday Night Live. It seems that there's so many political issues and bills that we should have concern about right now. There's a whole slew of them. We're going to talk in a moment specifically about the anti-conversion therapy bill, but before we get to that, it's not just that bill. There's a whole lot of ideologically motivated legislation that is sitting before or about to come before our Parliament. So can you just give us a bit of a rundown of exactly what is happening? Because it seems like it seems like there's a shotgun blast has gone off and there's just pellets flying everywhere at the moment.
Yeah, how long have we got to go through these bills? I mean, because I think, people want to concentrate on some of the more macro issues, which is around housing and homelessness and around income and around mental health. I mean, that's a huge issue that we should be focusing a lot of attention on, health and education. But here we are looking at wanting to, we've just spent a mass time debating euthanasia. We've just spent a mass amount of time trying to legalise recreational use of cannabis. We've just introduced a very extreme abortion law. And now we're into bills around banning conversion therapy. We're into hate speech, which I actually link the two. I think both are the same, and I guess we'll come back to that shortly. Yeah. But also there's other stuff on the horizon in terms of just the latest news about wanting to change the whole electoral system. As though they've got nothing else to think about. And also one that I'm just doing a little bit of research on at the moment and monitoring is around the surrogacy. And so there's a big push to make surrogacy easier, and nobody's asking the really big question is, should we be making surrogacy easier? The other one I forgot, of course, is the birth certificates, which is part of the gender ideology, which is that you can adjust anything, including official government documentation, which records history, to feed into gender ideology. So, yeah, it seems like this government, but I think the danger, Brendan, is that a lot of people say this government, Labor government, they're obsessed with it. To be honest, a lot of this stuff got its traction while National were in power as well. Yeah. Especially a lot of the gender ideology that's in school and some of the radical sex education. The National government were asleep at the wheel while a lot of this stuff was coming in, and so it does feel like an onslaught, and it's busy times.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you actually, have you ever, because I can't remember it ever being this bad, even under the peak of the Clark government, which was sort of formally had set the standard for ideological sort of imposition. I don't remember it being this bad and this constant. And it seems part of that is that what you've just alluded to is that both parties are so similar now when it comes to questions of morality and the human person and a vision for the human person and their flourishing, that they're so infected by ideology, it's sort of hard to tell the difference. Do you think is it just a feeling, or do you think there's more of an ideological sort of tidal wave at the moment?
Well, I remember that in effect, Helen Clark was voted out because of the negative association of social engineering, and it started with the decriminalisation of prostitution, and then it sort of reached boiling point with the anti-smacking law, and then of course, there were the little things like the shower heads and the light bulbs,
That's right.
and these kind of sealed the deal. Now we're back to a huge amount of social engineering that's going on, and look, it's really what's happened is that a year ago the country decided that they would give unbridled power to one party, and that party is using its capital, and I guess if you're in this situation, who wouldn't? But the danger is that we've gone back to a kind of first past the post system, which is really people can say what they want, but at the end of the day, the Labor government has the power, has the seats, has the numbers, has their little buddy, the Green Party, who are probably even more extreme, but they are, and so a lot of this stuff is just full on, and undergirding it, a lot of this legislation is what I would call a deplatforming of parents. If you look into this legislation, what it's doing is it's taking away either the need for a biological mum and dad, like, for example, the surrogacy, or it's undermining their authority, their role, the importance of family, and saying that state can do a better job. And we've seen a couple of classic examples of that, even just with the vaccine. Now, look, I know that's a controversial issue. Let's not go there on this program. But when you get the government basically saying to 12-year-olds, you don't really need to discuss it with your parents, mum and dad don't have the final say, we do as the state, that's dangerous. And it's the same with this issue around puberty blockers for young teens. The message that young people are getting is actually it's not your parents that make the decision. You just come and find us. We'll help you with what you're feeling and what you want. So I think parents are feeling very disempowered by this government, and I think that's what's really racking them up more than anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I worry a little bit that part of what we've got going on here as well is because of the pandemic, we're so distracted by it, and that's natural. But what it means is there's a whole lot of other extremely dangerous things that will be with us much longer that are sort of going on under the radar here.
Well, and I think the classic example of that was that at a time when we were all, to be honest, panicking at the beginning of last year and thinking, what is this epidemic? And we're going into lockdown. What does that mean? And I think there was a genuine fear. At that time, they were holding votes on legalizing abortion. And, apparently we were supposed to be all locking down to protect the most vulnerable, and yet here we were passing laws so that it would make it easier to kill the unborn. It just didn't make sense. And there was this sense of double standard, and it's actually quite concerning.
How do you feel about the select committee process? I myself personally have had involvement over the last, you mentioned a couple of previous issues where I, as an individual, made submissions and appeared before select committees and said my piece. I felt at the time that things were turning into political theatre. It seems this latest round, when I look at the anti-conversion therapy, some of the video I've seen coming out of those select committees, it really looks like it's political theatre that's put on for a show. It's almost predetermined. Do you feel that way or not? Do you think there is still a chance to swing things, or how do you feel about all of that?
Well, if you look at the manual that's given to MPs about select committee, they're told that they need to be respectful and, accept opposing views. And the select committee is a chance for contrary views to be brought into the meeting. But what's happening is that people are turning up, and generally if they're against these radical bills, then they're given a pretty tough time. And, if you and I show up, we're going to be given a tough time because we've got targets on our backs. For the general member of the public, it still is pretty daunting because, they sort of feel like they're up against it rather than they just have the ability to come and share their view as a member of society. It is very biased. In fact, there's been some video clips of some bad behaving MPs in these select committees. There's been some complaints made as well. One of the groups, Speak Up for Women, they were treated atrociously. And yeah, it has become theatre, and I think part of the theatre is because, I mean, it's now online and you can watch them all on Facebook because of us being in lockdown, and it's all on Zoom now. The advantage of that is that you can actually see what goes on and the behaviour. The problem is that, as you say, it's become theatre. And so you actually have MPs sort of launching into submitters, making a point and then sitting back as though to say, yeah, got you on that one. It's actually quite disgraceful. And especially when you hear people making submissions and making it passionate. Look, I don't agree with half of them either, but they're from the other side. But there is this kind of, you turn up and you'll be treated according to what view you have. And then we had disgraceful behaviour where people from overseas, if they supported the bill, they were welcomed with open arms and fantastic, thanks for your input. And then we had another submitter from Texas and basically challenged by the chair of the committee. I'm fascinated as to why you're making a submission on a New Zealand bill. The hypocrisy and the inconsistency was gobsmacking. And so, yeah, it's disappointing that it's got to that level. And look, to be honest, it started with the same-sex marriage. It was a hostile committee. Anybody who showed up to do a submission on the abortion bill probably found it pretty hostile as well. So, that's why we're working hard to put together guidelines for people, just give them the encouragement just to turn up. And that's part of the reason why we've been showing some video footage of some of these submissions, because I mean, one of my favourite quotes is Reverend Billy Graham, who said, when a brave person takes a stand, it stiffens the spines of others. Yeah, awesome. And I think when you just get ordinary Joe citizen turning up and being very brave and just speaking their mind, it stiffens the spines of all of us. And we say, yeah, I can do that. I'm not looking forward to it, but I can do that. So it's a pity that we've got to that point where people are nervous about it.
Let's talk about the biological sex on the birth certificate. That bill, that's one of the more recent ones you've been outspoken about. And by the way, I think rightly so. But I guess opponents would say, well, what's the big deal, Bob? Why can't someone just go back and retroactively change a birth certificate? It's not harming anyone, is it?
No, well, I mean, is it harming anybody to change my age to 13 so I can get the kids' rate at the buffet table? I mean, it's a ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah. Is it changing it if I was to change where I was born or my ethnicity? Doesn't matter if I change who my parents are. My parents are Tom Cruise and Sandra Bullock, and that's why I'm so handsome. It makes a mockery of a historical document, and it makes a mockery of a government document. Look, if they want to do a document out to the side, that's totally different. You may disagree with the gender ideology and the view that you can choose your gender, but at least that doesn't minimize and degrade what is a historical official documentation. But when you can just grab the twink and you can make these changes, and you can make them not only once, you can make them a couple of times. Yeah. And in fact, you can even revert back to the biological sex that you were when you were born, so somehow the doctor suddenly got it right. or, I mean, which of these genders can you choose? I mean, that was one of the interesting things, is that they don't define how many genders there are. So, I mean, you could have you literally could have hundreds. It'll get to that point. And so it makes a mockery. But I think what the feminist groups have been raising, and it's interesting, holding hands across the aisle with groups that may disagree on other issues. I mean, we would have totally opposing views on abortion, for example. But when it comes to this particular issue, we are totally on the same page, because women have fought for rights, they've fought for recognition, they want gender-specific treatment. And in fact, I heard a submission from a senior doctor who said, it affects our ability to create good health care, because a lot of it is gender-focused because of different gender needs. Men need to focus on the prostate cancer. Women need to focus on the cervical cancer. There are different cancers for different genders, and so this is what we're doing away with. But underwriting the birth certificate bill, underwriting the conversion therapy bill, and even underwriting the hate speech legislation, is this desire to cancel out anybody who disagrees with gender ideology. And that started actually with the same-sex marriage bill. So the same-sex marriage bill wasn't really about marriage equality, because there are some people who still can't get married. But it was actually about just doing away with gender. And of course, now they're starting to do away with the role of parents. It is a direct attack on a family. If you look at it in a macro level, that's not conspiracy theory. That is just a worldview that gender doesn't matter, marriage doesn't matter, families don't matter. Actually, the state is the best parent. As we know from history, that's a complete myth.
Yeah, well, and I'd also add to that, it's what something that Carl Trueman, the author who's written a great new book recently, talked about, the idea of plastic and political people. That what you do is you assume that everything, like everything is political, even your sex. Nothing is pre-political, and that's a very Marxist view of the world. So even your sex is assigned to you at birth because the society has created this political construct and then handed it on you, imposed it on you. And you're a plastic person, so you can reinvent yourself however you like. And that isn't just about a small group of people who might use that bill. All of us will eventually end up living and labouring under that ideology, because it just creeps out to everything. You know, it doesn't stay confined. It's, you know, the whole view of the human person has changed because of this.
And of course, it's been indoctrinated at an early level. And so, you know, as young as 4 and 5, you've been told that you can choose your gender. Now, when I was at school, I don't know about you, but all I was interested in was what had mum given me for lunch, and who was going to play at the playtime. I wasn't thinking about, you know, my gender statements and whether I was a boy or a girl. And look, to be honest, it worries me that we're stressing and confusing our kids by pushing ideologies that should be left to, you know, when you reach adulthood. And that's what really worries me. But of course, the activists understand that indoctrination, if you begin early on, then you get them. And of course, you know, it's also being reflected through gender ideology, the sex education, but also the critical theory that's being taught in schools, which is that, you know, you've got different groups, and certain groups are privileged and other groups are being picked on, and kids aren't thinking about race. They're just playing with kids that they like, you know, and once again, adult concepts into very young minds, and it's stressing them out.
Let's talk about the conversion therapy bill, or the anti-conversion therapy bill. I'll get to that point in a minute, because I think it's actually a bit of a mixed bag. But before we do that, I think it's probably both. We should point out that both of us staunchly would oppose any form of unjust or immoral coercion where someone would be forcibly taken and treated in a way that fails to respect their dignity, right, around their own life and the course that they're charting. So there's none of that on the table for either of us. But this anti-conversion therapy bill, why you've really staunchly stood up and said, look, we've got to draw a line in the sand on this. Tell us, let's break it down bit by bit. First of all, let's start with, what are the risks, do you think, particularly to parents? What do you think might be some of the risks to parents here with this?
Yeah, I think there's two major areas, and that is for parents, and then the second one is consent. So for parents, the problem is that the bill is so wide-ranging and people who support the bill will tell you that parents are safe. Don't worry, parents will not be affected by this bill. But if you look at the Crown law advice to the government, if you look at the Ministry of Health advice to the Associate Minister of Health back in 2018, if you look at what the Select Committee said in 2019, that was considered a couple of petitions, if you look at the regulatory impact statement from the Ministry of Justice, they all say that unfortunately it will impact families. It will impact discussions that parents have. And look, you just have to look at a typical scenario. Well, it's not typical actually, but a scenario where a young person comes home from the latest Rainbow Youth presentation at school, where they're told that they can choose their gender. And if you're feeling that you were born a female, but actually you want to identify as a boy, and you're a bit of a tomboy and you like the boys' things, and therefore you should identify as a boy. If you go home and start saying to mum, look, take me to the doctor because I want to go on puberty blockers. I want chest binders to get rid of these things. I don't want to go through puberty. I want to start cross-sex hormones as soon as I can. If a parent resists that and says, look, darling, you were born a girl, you're my daughter, let's deal with those feelings, but you're not going on chest binders. Then under this bill, you could be criminalised, especially if your little darling pops off to the local councillor or to the Rainbow Youth Officer and says that, my parents are practicing conversion therapy on me, conversion therapy. So, once again, this is undermining parents. And deep down in this whole issue is, what is conversion therapy? How do you define it? Because conversion therapy is actually still happening in New Zealand, and it can happen legally. For example, if you're a terrorist that comes into the country, you are actually given conversion therapy to de-radicalize you. For example, the other example is, everybody talks about this ECT, which is was given for mental health patients. It was given at Lake Alice. It has been used. The fact of the matter is, if you go on official documentation, you'll find that it's actually still used. So what we're looking at is abusive, coercive behaviours, and the problem is that it didn't only happen in some bad examples that we've seen in church groups in the past, but it also happened in state institutions. If you look at the testimonies that are coming out of Lake Alice, for the abuse inquiry, the commission of inquiry that's going into that, you'll see horrendous stories about what happened to people under state care. So we should rightly come down on those abusive, coercive practices. And if that's what they want to criminalise, go for it. Because I know for a fact those are not happening with any religious organisation. But what they want to do is, the ultimate goal is to criminalise anybody who disagrees with the agenda around sexuality and gender. And parents are in the firing line, because usually they are the first safeguard that children have from some of this radical ideology. And so parents should be concerned. And when you don't listen to the supporters of the bill, listen to the independent people who have given legal opinions. And we've also got a legal opinion, which is from Grant Illingworth QC, who's a senior lawyer around the human rights, who has said, yes, it will impact parents. And we also had a senior family law professor from Australia, Patrick Parkinson, who also sounded the warning based on the experience of what's happened in states like Victoria. So, it is concerning, and for parents, they should be concerned about the real impact of this bill.
I guess there's also then the effect on faith leaders as well, and people of faith, churches, etc., right? That they are absolutely drawn into this, because by definition, it's not just Christianity here, but there are several faiths that would hold a vision of human sexuality and human flourishing that would be contrary to the ideology that underpins this bill. And so it seems that they would also, or is that perhaps not the case? What is your assessment of that risk?
Well, that's why I equate it with the hate speech legislation, because in effect, what it's aiming to do is it's trying to shut down biblical sexuality. And so the hate speech law will target expressions of biblical sexuality, and the conversion therapy bill is targeting expressions of biblical sexuality. Now, biblical sexuality covers a whole lot of areas. It covers sex before marriage, it covers pornography, it covers adultery, it covers homosexuality, it covers our understanding of who we are biologically and our definition of marriage. Now, all of those things are things that groups hate. They hate hearing it. And so they are now wanting to shut it down by criminalising it. And unfortunately, the extreme end of the conversion therapy ban is about shutting down those types of expressions. Now, what they've done is what they did with the same-sex marriage bill. During the same-sex marriage bill, they said, look, churches would be able to express their opinion on and church denominations would still be able to say we're not going to marry same-sex couples. What they didn't say was that it's still going to affect the expression by Christians in the marketplace and as independent marriage celebrants to be able to also say no to same-sex marriage. So it was kind of this smoke and mirrors. Yeah, you can still express yourself, but deep down, we're going to still enforce it where we can. that's exactly what they're doing with the conversion therapy ban. They're saying, oh no, churches can still express biblical verses and they can still say about biblical sexuality, but as soon as you do it on a one-on-one, or as soon as someone sitting in the congregation says, well, that message is targeted at me and you're trying to convert me from how I want to identify, then you've got a whole new ball game. And of course, what the regulatory impact statement by the Ministry of Justice, I mean, the Ministry of Justice talked about prayer. It's not often that the Ministry of Justice talks about prayer, but they talked about prayer because they said that this bill will impact prayer. So if someone comes up to a pastor and says, I'm experiencing unwanted same-sex attraction, or I'm experiencing unwanted gender confusion, and I would like prayer in this area, a religious leader is going to have to be very careful if this bill is passed, because if the person doesn't like the prayer, they will argue that it's a form of conversion therapy, that it's done them untold harm, and you've just criminalized a religious leader for praying. So it will have a chilling effect. That's what the Crown Law said, that it would have a chilling effect. And what that means is that it affects your behaviour, because most law-abiding New Zealanders don't want to break the law. And if they think they might go anywhere near it, they will back off. And so that's the concern. Look, Brendan, that's not the first time we've had this kind of chilling effect. We had it with the anti-smacking law, where they didn't clearly define what we could do and couldn't do. It had a chilling effect. And so in effect, parents just said, oh, look, I can't discipline my kids. And the kids said, you can't touch me and you can't tell me what to do. That's the chilling effect. It has a greater effect than what is actually expressed. And what's interesting when you watch the submissions on the conversion therapy bill is that even supporters of the bill are all recognising that the definition is problematic. Mm-hmm. And I actually saw a submission from Auckland University law students, and they came and they supported the bill. But then they admitted that, no, there is problems with the definition of conversion therapy, the whole basis of the bill that they're supporting. And then, ironically, one of the politicians tried to give them a sop question and said, well, you've read the Ministry of Justice legal opinion or the Crown Law opinion. You'll realise that that's not a major issue. And they said, well, no, we haven't. And I had to pick myself up off the floor, because here were some legal students who hadn't actually read the legal opinions, government legal opinions on this bill that they said was badly defined, and yet they were supporting. So what I'm finding is a lot of people are supporting the bill because we all want to get rid of this nasty conversion therapy, just like we want to get rid of abusive practices and ECT out of places like Lake Alice. But we're not understanding that this definition is very broad and vague, because that's exactly what the proponents want.
Well, you mentioned consent earlier, and one of the things straight away that struck me about this was it seems that if you are a person who experiences same-sex attraction of any kind, and remember that could be someone who would identify themselves as being bisexual as well, who says, well, I don't really want to participate in same-sex acts, so I just want pastoral support. Like, I'm making a free decision of my own, and I want the people in my church to help me with that, or I want someone to just guide me on that journey. They are bound now. It seems to me that this bill effectively puts them in a situation where the law is saying, well, no, you must only express your sexuality in a same-sex fashion. Otherwise, there's not going to be any help available for you, or prayer, or any support, or anything like that. You must pursue only this one course, it seems. Like that they're not... And we know, there are situations where, yes, there is no doubt there are people who have deep-seated, lifelong same-sex attraction. There are others who we've known in the research for a long time, this is not controversial, that it can be sort of transitory, it can come and go. It just seems all so very controlled and overreach in a way that's really, really unhealthy.
Yeah, and I think one of the astounding things is that you've had a whole lot of counselling groups turn up and chant the mantra that we oppose conversion therapy and you've got to pass this bill. And what they are completely going against is this whole concept of self-determination, which is what counselling is about. And one of the worst parts about the regulatory impact statement, the advice to the government, was that they acknowledged that some people would turn up to because they did want to deal with unwanted same-sex attraction or unwanted gender confusion. But what the Ministry of Justice Boffin's officials said was, oh, look, they're probably coming under influence, or, they're not thinking right. That's effectively what they said. Now, on our website, freetolive.nz, we have documented story after story of New Zealanders and some Australians who have gone to counselling and have dealt with some deep-seated issues that have led to confusion around sexuality and gender, have been set free, and are so grateful for that type of counselling. What these counselling groups want to do is criminalise that type of counselling and criminalising those people being set free according to how those people want to be. And I think that's the most galling part about this bill, is that it takes away the consent of a person to seek counselling in the direction they want to go. And but that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to lock people into transgenderism. They're trying to lock people into homosexuality and not giving people the actual choice. So what they're saying is that we will help counsel you because everything's fluid and you can choose. Gender is fluid. Sexuality is fluid. We will help counsel you, and it's legal to counsel you in this direction. But if you want to go in that direction, forget it, man. Mm-hmm. We're going to criminalise that, and hey, we're going to chuck you in jail.
Well, here's the other contradiction too, I think, is that the research is very clear that for children who experience gender identity confusion, if you don't intervene in any way, with the onset of puberty, some studies show as high as 90% plus that issue will have resolved. So if that's the case, it seems the most dignified response is not to put them on a pathway of either social or medical transition of any kind. And yet this bill is looking to enshrine effectively what is a form of conversion therapy around gender, right?
Yeah, and when I sort of think about the logic behind what they're saying, I always compare it to anorexia nervosa, and I've actually downloaded the regulations by the New Zealand health authorities around this area. Now, the regulations around gender dysphoria is that you always believe the child and you need to follow the direction they determine, and you need to, the recommendation is to get them onto puberty blockers. Apparently they're totally reversible and they won't affect you, even though they block basically a natural progression of your body. And that gives you time to reconsider it. When you look through the regulations of anorexia nervosa, which to me is a similar condition, it's where the mind is thinking different to the physical reality. The mind thinks I'm fat, I'm terrible, I need to diet, and the body is actually very skinny, so skinny that it's actually wasting away and it's actually physically harming a person. A little bit like gender dysphoria. Female body, I think I'm a male. And so there's this disconnect. But with anorexia nervosa, we take the appropriate approach. We don't give them liposuction. We don't say, yeah, you're fat and we need to get you skinnier. We don't lie to them. We don't give them weight loss tablets. What we do is we heal the mind and we help them match up the way they're thinking with the physical reality. But when it comes to gender dysphoria, it's completely the opposite, where you simply buy in what the person thinks and desires, even if their thinking is faulty. And so, as you'll know, Brendan, with kids, they can't decide when to go to bed, what to eat, sometimes what the best thing is to eat, and what clothes to wear. They have meltdowns at times when they can't get certain things. And yet here we are saying that kids as young as 4 and 5 and 6 can actually figure out that they were born in the wrong body. It's actually quite dangerous. And I think at some stage in the future, we will look back on this period of time and say, what were we thinking?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I it's not uncommon in our house to watch my 6-year-old daughter literally have a meltdown at dinner time and say she doesn't want to eat until you sit alongside her and get her at the table. And then after about 10 or 15 minutes and she starts eating her meal, she realizes, oh, this is the best thing ever. And you realize at that point the absurdity of what's being proposed in these various bills, right? They just...
Mate, it's your cooking. I mean, I relate to it completely. Came around.
I can't blame her. She's a smart girl. Here's a couple of questions just to try and sort of tie a bow on this and wrap it all up. Firstly, just a quick one to wrap up the conversion therapy bill. I guess there's people out there who would think, oh, but Bob, Brendan, come on, we need this. We need this bill to keep people safe. I struggle to find, I've heard a lot of not ancient, but historical cases come forward, but I haven't heard anything recent that indicates that this is an ongoing and serious form of harm that's happening in our society right now.
No, it's not. We actually did a Official Information Act request to the Human Rights Commission and asked them how many complaints they'd had in the last 10 years. In 10 years, they'd had one informal complaint,
Wow.
Which was taken no further. Went to the Health and Disability Commissioner and said, how many complaints have you had about health professionals inappropriately using it? Once again, there was none. They didn't actually keep any figures. It hadn't really reared its head to them. And we did a search on their database for that particular issue on all the complaints, and it didn't show up at all. So, no, I don't think it is happening. Is there the expressing of ideas around sexuality and gender? Are we saying to kids, you are born a male or you're born a female? Sure. Our church is preaching that homosexuality is sin according to Scripture. Sure. So that is happening. Now, if you're saying, is that conversion therapy? Well, we would say, no, that's the expression of ideas. As I said, the galling part of this bill is the consent issue. I think that's the key. Take out the consent issue and protect parents from discussions and disagreements that they will have with their kids, as we all do, whether our kids should have an iPhone and whether our kids should have an Instagram account, and whether our kids can wear the opposite sex clothes type thing. That type of discussion within families needs to be protected. But that consent thing is crucial, because when you bring consent in, because the conversion therapy that we oppose is the stuff that is coercive, the stuff that is abusive. Now, people don't consent to that, and I think we need to allow people that self-autonomy, that self-determination. Look, we allow people to make that determination around their sexuality and around their gender. We may say we disagree with their decision, but people have that right. And once again, people should have that right to go in the other direction. So, as I say, we are just criminalising actions in one direction. And look, Brendan, to be honest, my warning to parents is that there is conversion therapy going on in schools. The conversion therapy is to convert kids to gender ideology and the whole area around sexuality confusion. And that's the conversion therapy that I would be getting banned. If we're going to ban conversion therapy, it needs to be the conversion therapy in both directions. But they won't do that, because back to what is the ultimate aim? They want to shut down, they want to cancel, especially biblical ethics. But it's not only biblical, it's also Quran ethics. It's many people of different faiths have these similar values.
Yeah, it's world building. It's absolutely world building. Have there been any particular submissions that have particularly impressed you during this process on the select committee? People who have actually had the courage to step up?
We've put a couple of them online, and you can actually go to our website and see those submissions, or go to our YouTube channel. I was fascinated by the group Women's Liberation Aotearoa, who turned up, and she was a very feisty lady who made it quite clear that you cannot choose your own gender, and that we should not be giving puberty blockers and chest binders to children, that it was confusing them. And she said that was totally unacceptable. She was a feminist. So it's always interesting to see people across the aisle that we may disagree on other issues when we come together. Same with the birth certificates bill. Actually, the feminist groups hate the concept of the birth certificates bill being able to choose your gender, because they've fought so long for gender-specific answers and health and requirements and gender equity, and then suddenly a dude can turn up and can suddenly choose to be part of that group and get those privileges, and that doesn't quite sit well with them. So, I just take my hat off to anybody who turns up for an oral submission, because they're being very brave, they're being very passionate, and I just thank them that they've made a stand, even when sometimes they're turning up to a bit of a hostile group.
And the numbers were huge, right, too? It was an overwhelming response. It's a New Zealand record.
Yeah, so the previous record for submissions was 39,000 on euthanasia, which was, that was a record because the previous record was about 25,000 for same-sex marriage. So 39,000 was the record. This had 106,000 submissions.
Wow.
Interestingly, and I think part of it probably was because both sides were pretty motivated, although interestingly, the one of the lead guys from the other side turned up and the committee congratulated them on their campaign. For some reason, I didn't get the same congratulations, so I'm sort of but also we were in lockdown when the kind of due date came up, so people had a lot of spare time, and we utilised that. Said, you've got time now, no excuses, make your submission. The media have assumed that these 106,000 submissions are basically all in favour. If you sort of read behind the lines, that's not the case. We will be doing an analysis of it. And one of the other interesting things that a lot of people weren't aware is that the other side used a template. And so they got people to go to a website and just pick sections of this template that they wanted. Now, we did that in the same-sex marriage bill. Well, actually, no, we didn't do it. We sort of gave a form which people filled in, and the select committee said, oh, well, that's a template. We're not going to allow oral submissions on those. The select committee, I think, will have to not allow these template submissions in support of the bill because they've all used these same phrases, but they've just picked and chosen different ones. So they really, to my mind, they really haven't thought through the issue. They've just cut and pasted. And we deliberately said, right from your heart, sure, we'll give you the head start of what the bill's about, but right from the heart. And I think that's been a positive.
One last thing to wrap up with, I guess, is I'd imagine you must be feeling a bit of the fatigue of all of this in the last few years and everything that's gone on. What would you say to people who sort of feel a bit overwhelmed by it all and they think, oh, no, not another bill, not another cycle of having to engage? What would you say to people in that situation?
It's funny, when Family First, so we've been going for 15 years now, 15 and a half, and when we got to our 10th anniversary, I think at board level, we got out a whiteboard and said, let's write down all the things we've achieved. And it stayed a whiteboard. No markings on it. We've had a few wins, but at the end of the day, it has been an uphill battle. It's been really swimming against the stream. And I think there was kind of a light bulb moment when we realised that we're not called to win. It's nice when we do, but we're not called to win. We're called to speak truth. And when a culture is going in the other direction, it's important they hear both sides. And, my encouragement to people is we may lose every battle, but we'll definitely lose it if we don't even show up.
Yeah.
And there's been some debates where I know that the writing's on the wall. I mean, I think we all saw the writing on the wall with the abortion bill. I think we all saw the writing on the bill with the same-sex marriage bill. But I tell you what, everybody was talking about the preborn and when does a person become a life and whose rights are more rights? Is it the pregnant woman, or is it the unborn child? And so it was a great opportunity for these discussions. Same with the same-sex marriage bill. The media never want to talk about marriage, but suddenly they were obsessed with it and said it was the greatest thing ever and everybody should have it. So you've got to take these opportunities to talk about some of these issues. And that's one of the things I look forward to with the surrogacy debate, is that it's a chance to talk about biology. And I mean, one of the interesting things is that the third most popular New Zealand on-air program on TV at the moment is David Lomas Investigates.
Wow. And
I don't know if you've seen it, but that's a program about people reuniting families and finding lost members of their family. And there's a deep longing for us to know who we are and where we came from and who are our mum and dad. We all have that longing. And that's going to be some of the discussion that we can have during this whole surrogacy debate. And should women just be treated as easy bake ovens? And can a man just provide sperm and then that's it? What's it like to know that your daddy was just a donor? That's his name. Daddy's name is donor. What's it like to know that mummy's name is donor? So, I think those are important discussions. Look, we may be facing, an uphill battle in that, but like I say, we'll lose every battle that we don't even show up to.
Well, I think too that there's a real problem if everyone of goodwill, every person of goodwill, just withdraws from the political and public square and the thought life of your nation, because what you're doing is you're leaving that ground open to all the nefarious actors to populate it with their bad ideas. So even showing up is still important.
For evil to succeed, it just takes good people to do nothing.
Well said, Bob. On that, I was going to say happy note, but on that important note, thank you so much, Bob. And it's just great to have you here again. And it's I think one thing I really appreciate about your work is the fact that you actually provide a counterpoint in the public square. And without that, I think, gosh, what would we have? There would be a very, very bland and dangerously bland public thought life going on in New Zealand. So yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for being here again.
Good to be on your show.
When we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. Oh, the good times just begun. Oh, we know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future